As Alex said, I'm speaking to you from Spain, where it's 10 o'clock in the morning, and we're still in lockdown here, and have been for 2 months, but we're coming out into the light, fortunately. And Maria, are you from Spain? I'm actually from New Zealand originally, so I'm not that far away from Australia in my origins, and I have family living in Adelaide, so I do come back from time to time. And so it's great to see so many people here, and just give me a feel for the languages that are represented. If you could type in the language you teach into the chat box. Chinese, German, Spanish, Sinhala, Greek, modern Greek, Kanaka, Vietnamese, Bulgarian, wow, Nepali, Hindi, Serbian, oh my God, this is fantastic. Tamil, Persian, Hungarian, wow, Mandarin, Thai, Chinese, Swedish, wow. You're a long way from home. Polish, you're also Macedonian. Wow, this is amazing. Okay, well, great. I ought to tell you at this juncture that my experience as a teacher and as a teacher educator has been in English language teaching. So I've taught English as a foreign language in a number of countries, and presently in Spain, and I train teachers of English as a foreign language or as a second language. So I have to say that as a proviso, because I'm not 100% familiar with the kinds of context in which you are teaching. I have given talks at conferences to teachers of modern languages. And I've always welcomed that, because it's wonderful to get a different viewpoint from just silly old English. So it's great to have so many languages represented. But I mean, at the same time, what I say, you will have to apply to your own language in your own classrooms in your own way. I can't tell you how you should adapt the ideas I'm going to pass, because they've been practiced, tried and tested with English, but not with Mandarin or Croatian or Vietnamese. And so that's up to you. But I will be interested, if we have time to chat at the end, to ask you if you think these ideas would work with the language that you are teaching. So here's another question. Oh, let's see if we've got. Okay, I'm going to open my PowerPoint now, and we're in business. Thanks, Alex. Okay. Right. Okay, and I'll turn this off at the end, but I've got the chat window still open. So if you do have questions or comments, then please don't hesitate to post them. So here's the first question for you. We're going to talk about grammar. I just want an independent of the language that you teach, but what in general, linguistically, what does grammar do? What is the function of grammar in language? Feel free to type your ideas into the chat box. It's not a test. It's just to get you thinking. I know it's been a long day for many of you. Structure. It makes sense of language. Okay, sense. Present, past, future tenses. Okay, there's that. There's different structures. It's the foundation of every language. Correct. Okay, interesting word. Correct structure. We're getting a repetition here. That's interesting. Connects. Context. Okay, that's interesting. Allows people to derive meaning. Okay, can you derive meaning in any other way, I wonder? Can you derive meaning without grammar? Well, we'll come back to that question. Produces a formula to help learn the language. Yes, that's true, and so on. Okay, fine. Well, I'm not going to answer that question immediately. I'm just going to take you through some examples. Let's look at some language without grammar. And then we'll see if we can redefine what grammar adds to the equation. So here's a sentence or a sign or whatever you want to call it, which has got minimal grammar. What do you think it's telling us? What's the message? If you saw this, what would you infer? Okay, it's a sign. What's it saying? What's the message? Banned for bicycles. Okay, you can't ride bikes here. It's not allowed to ride bikes. Okay. Okay, so yeah, we're generally in agreement that that's probably the message. And if we had to add some extra non-grammatical information to make that clear, then we could add this, yeah? So we're adding nothing to the words, we're just adding a picture to clarify the meaning, because it's not always the case that no bikes means bikes are not allowed. Because look at this. What does it mean here? Do you think? No bikes for sale. Okay. No bikes inside the shop. Sold out. Yes. Okay. So it's a bicycle shop with a sign saying no bikes. So it's probably not saying bikes are not allowed, but saying we don't have any bikes left. So what I'm saying here is that the context, in different contexts, that little sentence, no bikes, can have different meanings. It can mean bikes are not allowed here, or we don't have any bikes left. Yeah. So what the grammar is doing here, it's clarifying the meaning that is not available in the context. If we take away the context, we've got to kind of add something to make the meaning clear. We can add a picture of a bike being slashed out, or we can expand that sentence using a bit of grammar. Bikes are not allowed here, to explain what we mean by no bikes, or we don't have any bikes left, meaning no bikes. So let's try another one. Here's another one-word utterance. Can you suggest some possible meanings for cake? Question mark. Can we expand that? Okay, do you want to have some cake? Would you like a cake? Okay, we're just ready to eat. Please have a cake. Do you need cake? Would you like some cake? Would you like cake? Cake for sale. Okay, so again, without more information, this is ambiguous. It could mean, for example, shall I bring a cake to the party? Did you order cake? It could be in a restaurant. This is the server who wants. Is there any cake left? It could be, or it could even be the famous saying of Marie Antoinette, "Let them eat cake." So again, in the absence of context, we need more information. In context, it may be quite enough for, in a restaurant, the server saying cake, meaning would you like cake, or who ordered cake? So what I'm saying here is that the more context you have, the less grammar you need. You can get by with words, but the less context, the more grammar. That is to say, grammar compensates for the lack of context. Otherwise, we could just use words. Otherwise, we could just use words. Words would be enough if there's enough context. For example, here's another situation. Imagine an operating theater in a hospital, and the surgeon says to her assistant, scalpel, you know what a scalpel is? A little sharp knife, yeah? Scalpel. Now, is it necessary to say, please, could you hand me the scalpel that's over there? No, it's not necessary, because the context makes it perfectly clear that scalpel is enough, yeah? But if the surgeon left her scalpel at home and she's phoning her partner and she says, she can't just say, scalpel, yeah? The lack of context information and the distance means that she has to say something like, listen, I left the scalpel behind. It's sitting on top of the fridge. Could you send it over? Yeah, you see what I mean? So the longer, the less context, the more distance, between speakers, the more grammar is necessary. Words alone don't work. So to answer my question before, what does grammar do? Here's my answer. Grammar is the way that, in the absence of context, we sequence, that is, we put words in order and modify words. We change their endings, for example, in many languages, in order to achieve greater clarity and precision. Greater clarity and precision. So grammar is a toolbox for making meaning. And you kind of said that in your different ways. But I want to stress that in the absence of context, the less context we have, the less we can rely on words and the more that we need to bring in the grammar. And the grammar is essentially two things: the order of the words and how we change the words, whether we add endings, prefixes, suffixes, etc. Again, depending very much on the language. So that's my starting point. Now I want to look at the way grammar develops. And we can see that this happens too when children learn the grammar of their first language. When children start off speaking their first language, whatever it is, whether it's Mandarin, whether it's Serbian, whether it's Thai, whether it's English, whether it's Portuguese, they start off virtually without any grammar. They start with words, one word, two words. And so here's a study. This is a boy, an English-speaking boy, and this is the stages he went through when he was learning to speak his first language, his mother tongue, which was English. So you can see at the stage one, it's very rudimentary. Adam, home. Adam, go hill. Like Adam, bookshelf. Pick Adam up. Yeah. And then notice at stage two, we start to, so at the stage one, it's purely lexical. It's just words. Words, there's a little bit of word order there, but it's basically words. There's no inflections. There's no grammar. There's no auxiliary verbs. There's no articles. There's no prepositions and so on. Now, and pronouns. And now at stage two, we see he's moving along now. I like drink it. He's got a verb. He's got a pronoun. He's got two pronouns. I, Adam, it's not 100% adult-like, but it's systematic. And then at stage three, we can see that he's already starting to produce fully grammaticized words, sentences. And so this is a natural progression that children go through in learning their first language. And of course, as we well know, it's the stage that learners go through when they're learning their a second language or third language or whatever. So for example, we can take that initial stage in a second language learner, an invented sentence, me Tarzan, yeah? Me Tarzan, very, very basic, ungrammaticized, yeah? Just two kind of nouns, pronoun and a noun. And then the next stage may be me name Tarzan. And then the next stage, my name is Tarzan. So you can see that the grammar is being added as it becomes increasingly necessary. The meaning is clear. There's no problem with the meaning, but it's not necessarily precise enough to deal with an absence of context. Yeah, you would need some more grammar. The more distance there is between the speakers, the less context there is. And so various scholars have said, well, basically when you learn a language, and this was a study done on a lot of European languages where people were learning, say, Turkish speakers were learning Swedish, or German speakers were learning Danish, etc. And they looked at all these different combinations of all these different European languages, of people learning them as second languages, and they found that they all followed this basic progression, what they call the pre-basic variety, me Tarzan, the basic variety, me name Tarzan, and then the post-basic variety, which is my name is Tarzan, or I am called Tarzan, etc. But this is still at the basic level. This is not intermediate, this is not advanced, but the basic level, learners, whatever the language they're learning, are going to go through these stages. This is inevitable. And these stages are not unsystematic. They do have a kind of logic or a grammar to them. On the subject of Tarzan, you probably know this Gary Larson cartoon. So you've got Tarzan, he's thinking, he's rehearsing to himself, okay, how do you do? My name is Tarzan, and I believe you are known as Jane. And he's going, allow me to introduce myself. I am Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle, and you? And he's practicing again. You must be Jane. I am Tarzan. It's a great pleasure to meet you. There she is. Me, Tarzan, you, Jane. damn, what happened? What happened? After all that practice and rehearsal, what happened? In the event, all he could come up with was the pre-basic variety. And this is another thing about language learning, that because the system is not being activated, we may know it in our head, but it's not available in real time, we tend to revert to a level which is, in a sense, beneath our current competence because of the pressure of speaking in real time. And we'll come back to that point later on. Some more research, just to quote here, looking at one of the things you mentioned, I think, when I asked you what does grammar do, and you mentioned past, present, future. Yes, of course, grammar is very important in identifying the time reference. And when people learn grammar, they have different ways of representing time relationships. So this is a study of what they call temporality. That is to say, how we express time when we're learning, in this case, English. And the first day, so how they tested this is they gave people stories or pictures, or they saw a cartoon or a piece of a movie, and they had to say what they saw. And at the pre-basic stage, they tend to just use words like she steal bread and run away, and they join them in sequence. So this is what's called pragmatic. They're just putting one event and another event and another event to show the time sequence. Notice there's no attempt to put it in the past tense or whatever. And then there's what's called a lexical phase, which goes something like this. Then using words like then, next, after that, yeah, these different kinds of markers, the car of police come. But notice there's no attempt to use the past tense here. And then finally, there's the grammatical phase, and we get, and suddenly she cried, yeah, past tense. And so this progression from just putting words in a kind of certain order, then to adding lexical markers, of this case of time, then finally using grammar, is well attested. It's the stage that learners have to go through. You can't walk. No, you can't run until you can walk. So that's a little bit of background to what I want to talk about. Now I want to tell you a story about how I started teaching. Many years ago, and I was teaching in Egypt. Anybody here from Egypt? I didn't notice Egypt on the list of countries that went flying through. Anyway, I was teaching in Egypt, and I was using a textbook that looked like this, and it was very extremely popular at the time. It was one of the best-selling textbooks in the world, written by Louis Alexander, who was himself Greek. And it was, when you open it up, it kind of looked like this. So you had a lot of little dialogues with people called John and Mary, inevitably, and making tea. And you can see that the language is very simplified, and that it is, there's a kind of pattern there, if you might be able to detect, or there's certain kinds of structures. And this is from the teacher's book, and this explains what the patterns and structures are. So the language that's being taught in this particular unit is can you, principally. Can you? Yes, I can. No, I can't. He can, but he can't. And then some ancillary language of place and revisiting is there, are there, which has actually been taught before. Then you can see the vocabulary is kept very, very low. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 new words in this unit, and a couple of expressions. Now, this is the way I started teaching. And a lot of the teaching was based on these structures and patterns. So, for example, this is also from the teacher's book. I had to do these pattern practice drills. So these are where the students, with the books are shut, they have to respond with the correct response to my question. So the teacher says, can he drink this milk? Teacher nods, and the students say, yes, he can. Can you drink this tea? No, I can't. You can see, so this is very automatic habit formation, and there's a number of different suggested sentences also that the teacher can ask. And with nodding and shaking, the students know how to respond. They have to change the pronoun. She paint this room. Can she paint this room? Yes, she can. Can we read this magazine? No, we can't. So this was incredibly controlled, as you can imagine. And I'm not suggesting that this is how we teach now, but I just wanted to give you the background because I want to tell you a story. And this was at the beginner's level, but it was the same at other levels. The intermediate level, for example, the syllabus looked like this. So you can see unit 1, present simple, present continuous, past simple, blah, 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 going all the way through down, right down to unit 25, the past conditional. So these are, you can see this is extremely grammar-based syllabus, and it's very staged, it's very sequenced, it's very structured, it's very organized, very systematic. It doesn't allow much room for flexibility of mixing and matching, or certainly doesn't allow room for the students to say what they necessarily want to do. Because after all, you know, can you touch the ceiling? The teacher's going, yes, I can. So the teacher is supplying the meaning, the students are supplying the structure. So there wasn't a lot of creativity. There wasn't a lot of natural language use. Here again, from that intermediate book, this is these substitution tables we used a lot. I have no problem with substitution tables, but this told you what you had to teach. And these, in a sense, set the limits of what the learners were capable of doing. And they were based on long lists of structures that had been drawn up for English language. This is 1975. This book came out, which is just a lists and lists and lists of structures that should be taught at different stages. So stage 1, my name is Tom, that pen is black, he is in the garden, here I am, blah, 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 blah. It's not until stage 2 or stage 3 that they can start talking about the past. So this is how I learned to teach. But I recognized at the time that it was very limited, that the students, in a sense, were very frustrated. My students in Egypt were young professional people, many of them, university students. They were very keen to learn English. They were very motivated. They were very good at learning English in the sense that they had very good comprehension skills because they watched a lot of English television, movies, etc. And I sensed that as they took them through these pattern practice drills, etc., that they were somewhat frustrated because it seemed to be going so slow, and because, more importantly, they were not really given any opportunities to make their own meaning. So I went in one day to a class and I decided, let's just see what would happen if I said nothing. What would happen if I said nothing? If I didn't drill, if I didn't have them repeating? What would happen if I created a space in which they could say what they wanted? Now, how am I going to do this? Well, I need some kind of stimulus. So what I had was this. This was a Time magazine cover of its. This is the one I used. I found it on the internet. It was 1976 or something. I put this on the board. Yeah, I stuck it on the board and I sat down. Now, these were students who were in A1, A2. These were beginner students. They could not read a magazine like Time magazine, but they certainly knew, they recognized the story, they recognized the person on the cover, they recognized some details. But what? They looked at me, they looked at each other. There was an embarrassing silence. And then finally, one student said, Saudi Arabia. And then another student said, Prince Fahd. And then another student said, jet. and then another student. And gradually they started to produce words and more words, which provided, in a sense, the background to this story. And I said nothing. I said nothing. I said nothing. I did not repeat. I did not correct. I just sat and waited for them. And more, as they realized that I wasn't going to help them, more and more language came out of the class. There were about 15 or 16 students. And eventually, that kind of together pieced together the story on which this cover of Time magazine was based. So then I was faced with a dilemma. Now what do I do? So I said, okay, here's the pen, the board pen. I'm going out for a minute. Just one of you, I gave the pen to one of the students, said, write onto the board kind of what you all just said. Yeah. Try to catch everything that's just been said. And so off they went. I went outside. I came back about 5 minutes and they said, no, not finished, not finished. And then I came back another 5 minutes, still not finished. I came back. And when I came back in, the board was full of language, full of English, full of text. Their story about this picture. Now, it wasn't very good English. In fact, it was essentially lexical English. It was words. It was words that they'd been able to come up with and put into some kind of order. And then what I did, I just took their text and I said, okay. And then what's called now, I realized, I didn't know then the technical term, I reformulated it. I didn't correct it. It wasn't like saying this is wrong. I'm saying, this is what you're trying to say. This is what you're trying to say. And I'd write it along the top or underneath in the target language, in grammaticized, that is fully grammatical English, a simple English that they could understand. And then they copied that down. And that was the end of the lesson. That was an hour or more of a lesson the students created from the stimulus that provided. So what did I learn from that lesson? I learned two things, important things. I learned that the language I learn in the classroom is a communal process. It's jointly constructed. It's done together. That's the language that people remember and take away. So that's one thing I learned. And I suppose related to that, I learned trust the students. Trust the students. Yeah, they will come up with something. Trust them, even beginners. And then the other thing I learned, and this is what I want to talk about, is that grammar emerges. Grammar emerges out of words. Words first, grammar second. And that's the point I want to come back to. But any German speakers here? I think I did see German flash by briefly. This was Langenscheidt, the man who wrote the dictionary, said way back in the 19th century, Die Grammatik kommt aus der Sprache, nicht die Sprache aus der Grammatik. Grammar comes out of speech, not speech out of grammar. Grammar comes out of speech, not speech out of grammar. And we saw that when we learn our first language, that children are speaking before they have the grammar. Grammar comes out of, it emerges from spoken language and not the other way around. They don't learn the grammar and then they speak. So the traditional approach to teaching, the approach that I was using, was you start with a grammar and then you add words. So going back to this, my substitution tables, you start with a pattern and you add words, not many words, because the idea was you don't want to overload the students with lots of vocabulary. The grammar is more important than the vocabulary. So that was a traditional approach. Henry Widdowson, who was an eminent scholar and applied linguist, wrote as long ago as 1990. He said, I don't know about that. First grammar, then words. He said, I would suggest that a more natural and more effective approach would be to reverse this traditional pedagogic dependency. That is to say, first words, then grammar. Sorry, first grammar, then words, and begin with lexical items, vocabulary, and show how they need to be grammatically modified to be communicatively effective. Start with words. Show how they need to be grammatically modified, what changes you need to make to them to be communicatively effective. That's what my students were doing in Egypt in 1976, talking about this Time magazine cover. They started with words, and then I grammatically modified those words to make them communicatively effective. And that's really what I want to talk about. And I just want a couple more quotations. So that's the traditional approach. The alternative approach, maybe, as Widdowson suggests, is turn it around, start with the words, and then build the grammar on top. So the direction of processing is from lexis to grammar. Grammar emerges. This is Rod Battston, who was a student of Widdowson's, wrote a very good book in 1994 called Grammar, and he gave this as an example. Here are 4 words and 2 situations. Okay, you just choose one of those situations and then decide how you'll put these words together using grammar. Arrive, Jane, leave, John. So situation 1, you know that John doesn't like Jane. So you can choose that situation, or you could choose another situation. John and Jane are good friends, but Jane is feeling ill. So for situation 1, one possibility might be, if John doesn't like Jane, so when Jane arrived, what? John left. Or if in the second situation, it might be, the combination might be Jane arrived and John didn't leave, and so on. So there's different ways of expressing or putting those 4 words in using grammar for 2 different contexts, if you like. Okay, I'm just going to, I see there's some raised hands here. I'm going to move on though, just till we get, so we can get to the practical ideas before I run out of time. So what I'm talking about today is grammaring. Grammaring as a process. It's the process of adding grammar to words, not adding words to grammar, but adding grammar to words, because we've seen already that's what grammar does. It makes the message more precise, especially in the absence of context. So these are grammaring activities. And what I really am interested in is knowing is whether they would work in the languages that you teach. Okay, and so these are the 5 activities I want to describe. And let's get through them in 10 minutes, and it gives us plenty of time for some question and answers. Okay, so number 1, headlines. Well, headlines, newspaper headlines, because of the reasons of space, apart from anything else, are very ungrammatical. I mean, the grammar is often taken out of them. This is from my book, and I'll give you the details at the end. But this is an activity. Here you can see it more clearly. Here's some newspaper headlines. Expand them. Expand these headlines, which are simply lexical, so as to summarize the story. So, for example, banks warn homeowners interest rates to rise. One way of expanding that might be banks have warned homeowners that interest rates will rise, or banks are warning homeowners that interest rates are going to rise, etc. There's various ways. There's not one correct answer. So these are a number of headlines. This is not beginner stuff. This is more advanced, but nevertheless, you could simplify this. I mean, of course, you could also do it with telegrams, but we don't have telegrams anymore. But remember, telegrams also take out the grammar. Arrive Thursday, please meet. Yeah, and the idea would be to add the grammar into the lexis. Yeah, so you're starting with lexis and you're adding grammar. Very simple. Here's another one activity which is similar. It's not exactly headlines, but it's kind of timelines. So these are 5 key events in my life, and I want you to guess. And this is me as a teacher now. I'm telling the students. I want you to tell me why these dates are significant. Yeah, can anybody guess for 1950? Born. Yes, now exactly. Suffer, exactly. Birth. Suffer, exactly. Born. Yes. Now that's what the students say too. You born. You born. You very old. Okay. And that's where then I, as a teacher, would write, I was born. Yeah. So they say born. I say I was born. You see what's happening? I'm adding the grammar. What's 1967, do you think? Finish school, exactly. So that's very simple. And then I could add, well, more details here, grammaticize. The students are going to say, school, finish, leave home, graduate, whatever. So, yeah, I left home. Yeah, you see what I'm doing? I'm adding the grammar. 1974, I gave that one away. I started teaching. What about 1986? Got married, graduate, got married. 1986 we're looking at here. Maybe you've got to do the math. How old was I? Where do I live now? Where do I live now? And you start to go overseas, move to Egypt. That was earlier. Moved to Australia? No, I moved to Spain. But nevertheless, you see what I mean. And then 1997, you have no idea. It doesn't matter. So what's happening here is the students are going throwing words at you. Spain, teaching, home, born, 1997, migrated, married, divorced. No. 1997, I wrote a book and so on. Okay, now, and then what do you do? Then what do you do? When you've done that, you've written the sentences up now, the fully grammaticized sentences. So what do you ask the students to do? To do the same, obviously. So in pairs, and they could do this online, in pairs or whatever, write your significant dates in your life, and the others can guess what they mean. And that's a great way of getting to know each other. So it's not headlines, as I say, it's lifelines or timelines. I want to add that all these activities that I'm going to describe, I think, are possible for online teaching. But you can tell me that. So the second one is picture stories. Now, picture stories, we've always had picture stories. I started teaching again using picture stories. This was from a book that we used called Progressive Picture Compositions. It was very, very popular and had these little stories, 4 pictures each story. And what we did with these picture stories is we got the students to tell the story. Now, we could do this in whole class with picture on the board, students tell the story, elicit and I correct, or they could do it in pairs. And of course, they could do this online using just a simple chat program like we're using now. You put up the pictures and the students, in a sense, construct the story. Now, what's interesting is that in the book, they give you some help. And this is the help that they give you. These are the suggestions. Notice that, okay, so look at the pictures and complete these sentences. So they give them the structure of the sentences, and all the students have to do really is put in the vocabulary. Yeah, and it's 2 different levels to do that. So the second one, 25B, is slightly higher, more advanced level than the first one. So the idea is nice, but look, it's all about giving them the grammar and then they add the words. How about that we turned it around and give them the words and then they add the grammar? So here's here's how I would redesign an activity like that. So there's the picture, the story, and these are the words. Now take those words and add the grammar. Take the words and add the grammar. And you, of course, at more advanced levels, you don't even have to give them the words. They can supply the words themselves. But the point I'm trying to make here is that don't give them the grammatical information. Let them supply the grammatical information, and then you can kind of tidy it up for them. So this is, again, a very old technique using picture stories, but adapted to a more grammaring approach. Add the grammar, turn the words into grammar. Here's another activity or set of activities which are doing similar things with short poems. Now, poetry, a lot of poetry, especially modern poetry, is very lexical. So I'm not sure if you can see this, but you have 2 versions of a story. And the one, an A, is I am sitting on the sand and watching the sea. The sun is setting. There is a fisherman pulling his boat out of the water and up the beach. And there are birds flying, blah, 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 blah. Now, if you turn that into a poem, you get B, something like B. Sitting on the sand, watching the sea, the sun setting, a fisherman pulling his boat out of the water, birds flying, blah, blah, blah. So a lot of the grammar has been sort of taken out because it's not necessary. It's much more impressionistic to do. So this is, so to me, suggests an activity where you can give students text. They take the grammar out, and then they can put the grammar back in again. Or you give them a text with the grammar in, as in the top two here, and you turn it into a poem. So working both ways, turning prose into poetry and poetry into prose. But again, it's just being creative with grammar. So we give them the words, now you add the grammar. Okay, Dictogloss. You may know this activity. It's pretty well, it's been publicized a lot in the last few years. And in fact, there's a book called Grammatic Dictation by Ruth Weinrib, who was an Australian linguist, applied linguist and teacher. And she wrote this book and made the technique very popular. She called it grammar dictation, but it's better known as Dictogloss. It's a kind of dictation, but it's not a dictation in the traditional sense. Traditional dictation is usually words. I'm going to say some words, you have to write them down, spell them correctly. It's a kind of test of spelling. Or sentences. I'm going to say some sentences, you have to write them down correctly. So it's a kind of test of grammar. That's traditional dictation. Nothing wrong with that, but Dictogloss adds considerably to this basic technique. Do you know what I'm talking about? Anybody know Dictogloss? No. Okay, good. No. Okay. All right. Oh, okay. God, something new. Okay. So this is Dictogloss. It's fantastic. A fantastic technique. And you can do it at any level, and you can do it online, and you can do it in real classes. Yes, Claire says, teacher read out something, the students, okay. Yes, okay, so some of you do know. So this is how it goes. So instead of a sentence or instead of a word, the teacher tells the students or reads the student a complete text. It's a story or a poem or whatever, but it's more than just a sentence. The teacher reads it once, and the students don't write when they're listening. They just listen to the whole thing. And then individually, they try to capture what they can remember and write it down. And then they collaborate, in pairs or threes or whatever, to see, comparing their text to see if they can do it again and reconstruct the text again without having heard it. They hear it once. Technically, if it's well judged, it works. And if it's not too long a text, we're talking about 50 words, maximum 100. So here's an example I did. This was with a group of teenagers in Spain. I read them this little poem. There was a young woman of Riga who went for a ride on a tiger. They returned from the ride with a woman inside and a smile on the face of the tiger. And then I said, okay, right. So each individual student in this class, remember these are kind of B1-ish, maybe B2 students, teenagers in Spain. And, ooh, where did that come from? This is what they wrote. This is what one student wrote. Yeah? There was a woman from Riga who were on a tiger to make a ride. When they come back, the woman was in tiger and the tiger was smiling. So you can see that this student has captured the sense of the story. It's not exactly the same. And grammatically, it's kind of fairly basic. She keeps switching backwards and forwards from present to past and so on. Then I put them into groups of 3. They don't hear it again. Yeah, they're just doing it together now. But what this tells me is that at least the student has got a clear picture of the story in her head. She did understand the story. Now the challenge is to find the English to recreate it. And then the next group, working together in a group of 3, they come up with this. There was a young woman from Riga who go for a ride on a tiger. the tiger come back with a woman inside and a smile on the tiger. Now, do you notice it's starting to improve? We're getting a little bit more nearer the target. And finally, when all the class, I put all the class together, wasn't a very big class. So we're going from individual student to groups of 3 to the whole class of 9. Again, they don't hear it again. They're just doing it from what they can teach each other. I had one student at the board, and she took the general opinion of what, and this is what they came up with, the final text. Whoops. There was a young woman of Riga who went for a ride on a tiger. The tiger returned with a woman inside and a smile on its face. Now look at that. Look at that. That is not exactly what I said, but it's the story, and it is 100% grammatically correct. Now they did this themselves. They did this themselves. They added the grammar. Now I created an image, and they remembered some of the words in the image, the story. They grabbed the words they could remember, some of the phrases and sentences. They used their individual grammar, and then working together, they collaborated to use their joint grammar until they were able to come up with this perfect version of the text. So that's, again, Dictogloss is a great activity for adding grammar, and you can choose your text often by anticipating what it is that the learners may not quite know. Maybe some of them will, but together they can work it out. So here are some texts from my book, again, that I've chosen. Short text, poems, short news items. That's about as long as you need. You read it once at a natural speed. If necessary, you can tell. If necessary, you can read it again. But often it's amazing how little they need, depending, of course, on the level. Okay, finally, task repetition. Task repetition is what it says. Task repetition is when you do the task again. And I've talked about this at length on other webinars. I'm just going to give you an example now. Going back to our story about the picture story. Remember the picture story? Well, here's some students doing a picture story. They're recreating a picture story. There's 3 of them. They can see the pictures, and they're basically telling the story. And they do it first time, and then do it a second time, and then do it a third time. And they're getting no help between each of these attempts. And notice that in the first one, it's pretty basic. It's quite short. They went to the park by car, and he go with his dog, and he take lunchbox, and I have sandwich and hamburgers. But they do it again. No help from the teacher, but let's try it again. And then the third attempt was a nice sunny day. So Tom and Victoria decided to go to. Now look at that. Again, you see it's become grammaticized, it's textualized, it's a lot better. And we can see, just looking at some of the differences I've highlighted here, he go with his dog, first attempt. Third attempt, they went to picnic by car with their dogs. I have sandwich, they had lunchbox, and so on. You can see huge improvement because now they've got the story, the details of the story down, they can start working on the fine tuning. So again, grammar is all about fine tuning for clarity, fine tuning for precision. It's not about accuracy or correctness necessarily. That's one of the consequences. But it's not just this is more accurate, it's more complex, it's longer, and the vocabulary has improved. Look, they had lunchbox. I mean, lunchbox didn't figure in the first one. All we have is sandwich and hamburgers and champagne, and so on. So this is the value of task repetition. People who have studied this say that there is a strong positive effect for task repetition. The evidence strongly supports the view that the previous experience of a specific task aids speakers to shift their attention from processing the message content to working on formulations of the message, getting the students to do it again, getting the students to do it again. Now, why don't teachers do this all the time? Because they think it's going to be boring. They think it's going to be boring to do it again. Students will be bored, I'll be bored. No, not if you change something. Just change one thing in the way that you do this. For example, you can change, they can do the same task, but they can do it with a different student. I can tell a story about what I did at the weekend First of all, I do it with Juan, and then I do it with Merce, and then I tell it to Jose Luis, and so on. So I'm doing the same story, but each time I'm doing it with another different student. And each time there will be improvement. In the classroom, we can do this in typical organizations like this kind of onion. I call it an onion. So you have an outer circle of students around the outer. So I'm demonstrating this in a conference in Ramallah, in fact, in Palestine. You have an outer circle and you have an inner circle. And maybe they've drawn their family tree, yeah, and they're describing, or they've got photos of their family. They're describing their family to their partner, and at a signal from the teacher, the inner circle move around one, so they've got a new partner, and they repeat the task. The challenges on online teaching is how can we organize this so that the students are doing the task again, but they're doing it with another partner. And the other important thing here is that they get feedback between each iteration of the task so that they can keep improving. So they do the task, they get feedback, they repeat the task, and they get more feedback and so on. And as you saw with the example of the picnic, the grammar gets added. It starts off more lexical and then the grammar gets added. Okay, folks. Those are the 5 activities I've done. The challenge is, how can you adapt these for the online teaching if that's what you're doing? I think you can. And I think particularly students constructing stories together from pictures, where you show them the pictures and using the chat room, that they put them together collaboratively. But also as a homework activity, taking a text, turning it into a poem, turning it back into a text, and so on. And then dictoglosses, I think, can work where and there's 2 ways of doing a dictogloss. They can hear the text, or they can see a text, and then you take it away. Yeah, so you can put it on the screen, you can take it away and say, okay, together, see if you can reconstruct the text. Okay, folks, that's the book that I'm referencing here, which came out some time ago, but it's got a lot of those practical ideas in the back, published by Macmillan. And that's it from me. So I'm going to go back to the group and keep my chat window open, wherever it is. And let's see, we've got 5 minutes or so, see if we can address any of the questions that you're burning to ask. And here they come. Grazie, thank you. Oh, can we see the book again? Yes, it's called Uncovering Grammar by Scott Thornbury, published by Macmillan. Okay, any questions? Thank you to all of you. Thank you. And good luck. I mean, as I said before, you have to do the math. Yeah, you have to convert these ideas into Mandarin or Croatian or whatever it is that you're teaching and see if they work. I think in principle, there's no reason they shouldn't work. Of course, some languages have, in a sense, more grammar, certainly inflectional grammar, than others. But all languages have grammar. And all languages have lexis. And the challenge to you is saying, okay, how can we adapt this to, as I say, to teaching Thai, to teaching Urdu, to teaching Arabic or whatever? Thank you very much, all of you. It was great being with you. How many people did we have in the end, Alex? Oh my God, 202. That's must be every teacher in Australia who's teaching community languages. Well, that's wonderful that you've put the time aside, and I hope that you did get something out of this, and that next time I meet you, I'll meet you face to face. Alex, anything? Have you tried these principles non-English language? No, I haven't, and that's what I'm saying. That's for you to try. I've only done them with English, but I see no reason why they shouldn't work with other languages apart from English. How do you differentiate teaching grammar at different levels? Yeah, I mean, at the levels, my feeling is that you let the students, in a sense, be your guide. Don't let the course book be your guide necessarily in terms of the level, what grammar, what level. Remember with my Time magazine story. They were producing sentences. They wanted to express sentences in the past. Technically, they didn't have the past tense, but yeah, whatever. The past is incredibly important. If you can't talk about what you did at the weekend, if you can't talk about when you first came to Australia, then you're really limited. If you're always talking about, I get up at 5 o'clock and I brush my teeth, that's not really interesting. The past is really interesting. I say, follow the students. What they want to talk about, let them talk about, teach them the grammar that will enable them to do that. The book again, I love changing my book again. Whoops, Uncovering Grammar, Scott Thornbury, published by Macmillan. That's me. And how can we introduce different grammar structures in the new language that they're learning? Verb at the end instead of beginning of the sentence. Yeah, well, I mean, I think, again, through things like Dictogloss, so you give them a text which has got the new structures embedded in, they try to recreate it from memory. They get it wrong. They can compare it to the original text. Say, oh, the verbs go at the end. I forgot about that, yeah? So using language and context, grammar and context, remember grammar is about language and context, then that may be a way of feeding it in rather than just lecturing them about the grammar. So giving them examples and little stories, little texts. Some languages have spoken language and written language. Yes, okay, that's true. Some languages have a sort of hieratic and a demotic form. They have, like Greek, for example, or Arabic, etc. Depending again on what the learners need, you will have to tailor those choices. So giving them examples of spoken language, transcriptions of short conversations, etc., to show the spoken language, and maybe convert the spoken language into written language and vice versa. Take a dialogue and say, okay, here's a dialogue, now turn it into a written text, and so on. I have an activity I didn't show you called Paper Conversations, which works really well at the beginning of every lesson. And I think it could work online. And you just simply, the students have a conversation, but they're not talking, they're writing. It's like texting, text, 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 text. So they text, what did you do at the weekend? And the other one texts, I went to the beach. And the one texts, did you go alone? No, I went with my friends. What did you eat? What was the weather like? Blah, blah, blah. They're writing. Now, writing it down has the advantage that it focuses their attention a little bit on the grammar, but also gives you, the teacher, something to look at. You can pick it up and say, oh, okay, not what did you do by the weekend, but at the weekend. Yeah, preposition mistake. Did you go beach? No. Did you go to the beach, etc., etc. So it gives the teacher lots of data, and then they can feed back to the learners. Okay, I think Alex is back online. Alex, is it time to wrap up? Oh, I need to. Do I need to unmute you?
Okay, that's great. Yes, here I am. Thanks. All right. I'm not sure if you can still see me. Scott, look, thank you so much. It was really, really interesting. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of, it was actually 208 people this evening, which isn't too bad for this time of the day. And a lot of people are still working. So look, Scott, that was really, really interesting. Thank you so much. I'm going to keep going. I just need to pass on some information to our people. Whenever you're ready, you can go back to Barcelona and to your daily activities. And we hope to see you in Australia sometime, Scott. That was really great. Thanks very, very much. All right. Okay. All right. So what we're going to be doing, everybody, just before you go, I'm going to ask you just very. Oh, we can't do any screen sharing because Scott has actually taken over my screen. So that doesn't matter too much. What I'd like to do is, if I can, here we go. I'll see if I can share a screen with you. And hopefully we will be able to I just want to pass on some information. And he won't let me do it. Right, okay, look, don't worry about it, everybody. I'd like to, again, thank everybody that came. I'm just gonna plug, no, I don't wanna plug his book. This is the new edition of Scott Thornbury's Uncovering Grammar, okay? I just like to let you know that he's a brilliant speaker. He speaks all over the world. He did say that it was for English, but basically a lot of his ideas are relevant. So if you go through this book, I've actually used it quite a lot, and it's great to get ideas. Now we've all got our favorite books.
Alex, sorry, Alex, I think you can probably open, I've just made it available, the screen, if you want to try now.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right, there we go. All right, so we'll just have a quick look at that. And let's just quickly, all right, doesn't matter about the book. Let's have a look at what I've got to tell you. I've got some messages for you. So just to go on about that particular book, full of ideas, everybody, very successful. And by all means, if you need any information, I mean, I've got it here. We actually might even have a copy at the Federation if anyone wants to borrow, but we've got one for what, 4,000 teachers. Now, just before we let everybody go off to dinner, a lot of the material that we have, in fact, there will be all of it very soon, is already on a Google Classroom. Now, at this stage, you'll need a Gmail account. That'll make it a lot easier. We're having issues with some Hotmail accounts, but that's okay. Just write to me, and I'll invite you. Now, if you've got some issues with it, that's the Google Classroom. That's the code, and you'll find some videos of this, as well as other instructional videos that the Federation's made. Now, on that particular one, don't forget that we've also got a YouTube channel. If you just Google, or while you're on YouTube, you'll see the videos on the New South Wales Federation of Community Language Schools YouTube channel. This Thursday, everybody, is what we're doing, another teacher forum. So if you're interested in getting together with other teachers and sharing your ideas, such as the one you may have seen tonight, I saw quite a few of you very, very up to speed, very quick with your chats and your ideas and your suggestions. So it's a great time now, especially that everyone's gone online, to share ideas. So please, come along, come to this webinar. It's a teacher forum. You'll be able to do exactly what I did. You can share your ideas. I'll pass over the microphone to you, and you can, if you've got something, send it to me, and I can put it online, and we can all see it. That's this Thursday at 6 p.m. The other thing is that our next session is on the 25th of May, and that's with a local but very popular speaker, and that's Matthew Absalom. Some of you may have seen him already at our conference. Again, a teacher of, well, not of English, but a teacher of language, and he's at Melbourne Uni, and he was forced to go online like all of us. And he's got some great ideas to share with you about what to do and what not to do when it comes to teaching online. Now, everybody, good night. Thank you very much. Please get in touch if you've got anything to say. You've got our emails. You've got our, in all the emails that you've already received, you've got phone numbers there, so please do keep in touch. And we'll see you at our next webinar. We've got one this Thursday and the one next Monday, and many more to come with some special guests. They're very special guests indeed. All right, so thank you, everybody, and good night. And don't forget, this is recorded. This is recorded, and we will be